The night was supposed to be simple: 2 neighbors, 1 old car, a drive-in movie, and a few hours of forgetting everything that hurt. But when my neighbor climbed into the back seat and whispered, "The movie can wait," I realized she wasn't asking me to ignore the movie. She was asking me to notice her. I had spent the past 2 years becoming the kind of man who avoided noticing people. After my younger brother died unexpectedly, silence had become easier than conversation. I went to work, came home, locked my door, and repeated the same routine until the days blurred together. Then Claire moved into the house next door. She was the kind of person who smiled at strangers, carried groceries for elderly neighbors, and somehow remembered everyone's name. I tried my best not to get close to her, because I had learned the hard way that caring about someone meant eventually having something to lose. If you believe people deserve second chances, and that sometimes kindness can reach places words cannot, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. You never know who might need a story like this tonight. Claire had been living next door for almost 6 months when she asked me about the old drive-in theater outside town. I had mentioned it once while carrying a box into my garage. She remembered. I told her the place was nothing special anymore, with cracked speakers, faded signs, and an enormous screen that flickered whenever the wind got strong. She smiled and said that sounded perfect. I didn't understand what she meant until she added that perfect places were usually overrated anyway. So on Friday evening, I cleaned my old sedan, bought 2 sodas and a bag of popcorn, and picked her up at 7. Claire stepped outside wearing a simple blue sweater and jeans, carrying a blanket over one arm. She looked nervous, though she tried to hide it. I asked if she was okay, and she said she was. But something in her eyes told me she was carrying a story she hadn't figured out how to tell. The drive-in was nearly empty when we arrived. We parked near the back, away from the families and couples scattered across the lot. The movie was an old romantic comedy neither of us had heard of. For the first 20 minutes, we laughed at the ridiculous jokes and made fun of the terrible acting. Then Claire became quiet. The glow from the giant screen painted her face in pale colors. She stared straight ahead, barely touching her popcorn. I asked again if something was wrong. This time she didn't say she was fine. She simply looked at me and asked whether I had ever stayed somewhere just because leaving felt worse. I didn't know how to answer. So I told her about my brother. I told her how he had called me 3 times on the night he died, and how I had been too angry to answer because we'd argued earlier that week. I told her I had spent years wondering whether answering that phone could have changed everything. I admitted that sometimes I still heard the ringtone in my dreams. Claire listened without interrupting. Then she told me about her own father. He had been sick for years, but before he died, Claire had spent months caring for him. She had cancelled plans, missed opportunities, and slowly watched the man she loved become weaker. After his funeral, she moved to this neighborhood because she couldn't stand living in the same town where every street reminded her of him. She said she thought moving would make the memories disappear. Instead, she discovered that grief traveled with you. The movie continued in front of us, but neither of us was watching anymore. Then Claire suddenly unbuckled her seatbelt. I turned toward her, confused, as she grabbed the blanket and climbed carefully into the back seat. She looked at me and gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. The movie can wait. For a second, I didn't understand. Then she spread the blanket across the back seat and told me she didn't want to spend the evening pretending everything was okay. She wanted to sit somewhere quiet with someone who understood what it felt like to miss someone who couldn't come back. So I climbed into the back seat too. We sat there with our backs against the doors, listening to the faint sound of the movie outside. Neither of us tried to make the moment romantic. It was something more fragile than romance. It was trust. Claire rested her head against the window and closed her eyes. I told her that grief had made me afraid of getting close to anyone. She told me she had been afraid that if she stopped being cheerful, people would stop wanting her around. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. We talked for hours. We talked about the people we'd lost, the mistakes we wished we could undo, the apologies we'd never gotten to give, and the strange ways life continued even when our hearts hadn't caught up. When the movie ended, the parking lot lights came on. Families drove away. Couples laughed as they walked toward their cars. We stayed where we were. Then Claire reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photograph. It was a picture of her and her father sitting beside an old lake. She said she had carried it everywhere since his funeral but had never shown anyone. I looked at the photograph and told her something I had never fully believed myself: missing someone wasn't proof that you were broken. Sometimes it was proof that you had loved them deeply. She cried quietly. I didn't tell her not to cry. I simply stayed. Weeks passed after that night, and something changed between us. Not suddenly. Not magically. We simply began showing up for each other. We drank coffee on Sunday mornings. We fixed the broken fence between our houses. Claire convinced me to answer calls instead of letting them go to voicemail. I convinced her to stop apologizing every time she needed help. One afternoon, she knocked on my door holding 2 envelopes. One was an application for a photography course she had wanted to take for years. The other was a letter I had written to my brother but never sent. She told me it was time for both of us to stop waiting for permission to live. I laughed when she said it, but later that night I mailed the letter. It didn't bring my brother back. Nothing could. But for the first time, I wasn't writing to change the past. I was writing to say goodbye. Months later, Claire and I returned to the drive-in. The same cracked speakers were still there. The same faded sign leaned toward the road. But this time, we brought blankets, snacks, and 2 friends who had become part of our lives. The movie started. Claire looked at me and smiled. Then she whispered that she actually wanted to watch it this time. We laughed. And as the screen lit up the night, I realized the movie had never really been the point. The point was that 2 lonely people had climbed into the back seat of an old car and finally stopped running from their memories. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with a miracle. Sometimes it arrives as a person sitting beside you in the dark, refusing to leave until you remember that tomorrow is still waiting. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who might need hope, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your small act of support may help this story reach someone who feels completely alone. And before you go, comment, "The movie can wait," if you believe that sometimes the most important moments in life are the ones we never planned. Because sometimes, the person sitting beside you isn't there to change your past. They're there to remind you that you still have a future.